So, welcome everyone. I'm so happy you're all here to join me to talk about ADHD and routines. This is mostly for routines with our kids that have ADHD, but if you yourself have ADHD, it will apply as well. Feel free to throw a hand up at any point if you have any questions. I'm also going to stop several times for questions, and I hope you enjoy. So these are the routines that I am going to go over today, the homework routines, bedtime routines, and getting out the door on time without losing your mind, without tears or tantrums from parent or child. Um, if you are like I was when my children were elementary school or on up, these were all issues that we battled with on a daily basis. And I knew that there had to be a better way than spending every day arguing and yelling and pleading. And so I have come up with some tips that have worked for a lot of people. So, just a little bit about me. My name is Kat. I use she, her pronouns. I am a master certified ADHD affirming coach. I typically work with parents and students. I also work with um, later diagnosed adults coming to understand their diagnoses. I also have ADHD. I've raised a couple of ADHD kids who are adults now. And so I use my experience in education to help pretty much everybody in all ways tackle ADHD in everyday life. So today I'm going to share a little bit about why it's a struggle, routines, why routines are a struggle for our ADHD kids, and then touch on these three particular routines: bedtime routines, homework routines, and getting out the door on time. If we have time at the end, I'll gladly touch on any other routines that other people have questions about, and then we'll do a wrap up. So, why do ADHD kids and adults struggle with routines? Can anybody? Oh, I can see the chat. That's great. So if you throw it in the chat, why do your kids struggle with routines? Distractions. Yeah, distractions are a big one. Focus. Yeah. Time blindness, emotional dysregulation, sensory dysregulation, working memory struggles, lack of autonomy, lack of buy-in, not sticking with it yourself. That's a good one. Overwhelmed. I want to touch real quickly on this lack of autonomy. So, for our kids specifically, this comes up a lot because it's usually the adult that is setting the routine. What we want. We want the kid to do their homework at this time, go to bed at this time, brush their teeth at this time. Well, in an effort to help a child feel more autonomy, we have to include them in the process of setting the routine. So if you set the routine and it has no meaning to your child and that's not their goal, they're not going to stick to it. Questions? Other ideas? So bedtime. What I can tell you about my house at bedtime was it was a disaster. From the time my kids were old enough to argue about bedtime until we could figure out a way to make it a little bit easier for everybody. We had daily meltdowns, tantrums, tears, and more from both the kids and the adults. It was not a fun time. So how did we make it better? So the very first thing I encourage is make sure you have the best sleeping environment. And by that, I mean for your child or for yourself if you're working on your own routine. You need to think about things like the lighting, the sound in the room, the sensories in the room. If your child needs a plushie or a certain blankie, or they don't like certain kinds of sheets. Maybe the sheets are too rough for them. Maybe it's too loud. Maybe they hear things you think are not a big deal, but that bother them. So really get curious and, you know, as your child ages, collaborate with them about what they need and then make the best possible sleep environment for them. I hear a lot of times people will say no electronics, no books, no toys, no anything in the bed. That doesn't work for everybody. So my encouragement is you do what works for you and your kid. My kids were allowed to read or, have their books in their beds as long as they were in their bed and quiet at a certain time. That's all that mattered to me. So it's really about figuring out what is important to you and then what is important to your child that's going to make them want to stick to that routine. Questions or thoughts or comments? So the next thing is making sure that there's enough of a transition and wind down time. Um, Adults get overscheduled and kids, we overschedule our kids. And so we move from one event to the other without allowing for transition. And so one of the things that's worked for me and worked for my kids is allowing like a 15-minute transition time from one activity to another, whether it's dinner time to homework time to getting ready for bedtime, a transition period where we slowly stop one thing before we start the other thing. Um, it helps with ADHD who we need, it's hard to snap change like that. So I, for example, set an alarm 15 minutes before I need to start doing something because it gives me that it's like, oh, I need to do something. And it allows me to start thinking about it and knowing it's almost time so that when it is time, it doesn't surprise me. And that worked with my kids a lot. So I encourage that. I do encourage wind down time. While I don't necessarily agree that you should not have electronics, you should not have this, that, or the other, I do think what you want to aim for is winding down and things that are going to lower your nervous system responses. So for some people it's reading, for some people it's listening to music, for some people they want to exercise for a few minutes before they get to bed. Like I whatever works for you to make you or your child feel calm and ready for bed, you need to make sure you have time for that. For younger children, something that we have found helps a lot is to create charts, visual charts with bedtime steps. And this is going to come up with some of the other routines as well. I've seen all types of creative and imaginative charts or visual reminders. From a chart on the wall with just a couple of steps to a list with a check off, to a board where you can put stickers as things go. One mother had a set of elastic key rings that were different colors on, and that the child would put the five colored things on, and each one had a tag with a chore, and they would take the bracelet off as they did it. So it would remind them by having it right there on their arm. They had to have all five bracelets off by the time they left for school. And each one, it would, brush your teeth, make your bed, or whatever the tasks were. So get creative with how you use those reminders because that mother had a chart and the child never looked at it. So by having it, instead of having a chart, having it right on the child's wrist, they
I
can't. Yeah, go ahead, Donna.
I love, first of all, I love that. Second of all, let me just say I'm ready to start it tonight with my partner's child because that is exactly what I think is missing. I know he's struggling with this bedtime right now. We are, because the child has just gotten to, it's neurodivergent child. We just introduced him to his own bed in the room,
Mm,
but within the bed. And we're having so many, like, setting up routines, like you're saying, all these wonderful, amazing things. We're working on that. But again, like the visual cues, or like you're saying, the charts, even something as small as making sure the siblings are in on it, because now we're like
right.
realizing that the child will get up and the sibling is the one awake and has to bring him back.
Uh,
So
uh,
everyone has to be in on it, like it's not just the
yeah.
system, but making sure everyone's in on the same system. But that bracelet is just brilliant. I'm definitely going to try it
Yeah.
today. I'm going to present that. Thank you. I think that
Yeah.
would be an amazing.
Sure, you're welcome.
uh,
That was an idea from another mother that I thought
I
was
can see
brilliant.
it. Especially, I'm an experiential learner, so you can have the visual on the chart, but if you don't make me physically tactile, go through that with that bracelet, it changes that experience to becoming more experiential than just visual.
Right. And
And I love that.
for her child, it was also, it went with them. A lot of times a list or a chart will either stay on the wall or on the desk or in one room, but as the child walked around, it stayed with them and they didn't have to remember to pick it up and take it with them physically. So they found that to be super helpful. I'm glad it sounds like it might be helpful for you. Um, and any kind of thing that will work. The biggest thing is collaborate with your kids to find out what will work for them, right? Because it might not be what works for you, especially if they have ADHD, they're neurodivergent and you are not, or even if you both are. Like what works for one person is just not going to work for the other. So really, really getting curious and collaborating with our kids in these situations gives you the best chance of success. And then there are a million and a half mindfulness, relaxation things. There's aromatherapy, there's, massage. Like there's a million different kinds of things that might work that your family might find helpful that my family might not. So really just get curious and collaborate. And when something doesn't work, don't throw it out right away. Take a few minutes to pick it apart and see, did any piece of it work? Was there a roadblock? Is there a part of it you could take to the next attempt so that eventually you find what works for you and your kids? Any questions about bedtime routine? All right, so next we are going to talk about homework routines. I homework routines were the bane of my existence as a parent. I had two with ADHD, and they had wildly differing needs when it came to routines. So it was definitely a challenge. And so here are a few tips. So similarly to bedtime, setting the stage, having a dedicated place for your child to do their homework that isn't just this is a desk, this is a chair. It's got everything they need to complete their assignments. So depending on their age range, it has pens and pencils and a calculator and the books that they need and the electronics that they might need, whatever they need right there within reach, and that it addresses their sensory needs. So maybe it needs to have a ball that they sit on to bounce while they're working. Maybe they need fidget toys nearby because they like to fidget while they're working. Maybe they need a certain type of lighting. Maybe they don't like to hear kids playing in the backyard, so you want to play some quiet music. Maybe they like to listen to loud music while they work. Maybe that helps them. You really have to figure out what is going to work for your individual child and your family. It's difficult if you have one child, for example, that needs quiet and one child who likes to listen to music really loudly. And of course you can get headphones and work around stuff like that, but it really is a matter of digging deep with the child to find out what they need and when they're resisting, what the resistance is. And often they don't have the language for that until we help them figure it out. So it may look like saying, is the lighting bothering you? Are you hungry? You know, whatever, getting curious and asking a lot of questions is going to help give you the best answer for your kids. There's another mother I have. Her child has these bands that go on the bottom of the chair that he can play with his feet while he's doing his work, and it helps him. A lot of kids need some movement. Um, I have fidget toys everywhere, literally everywhere, everywhere, because that works for me. But really find out what works. And then the next thing is figuring out the time. One of my biggest struggles when I was raising my children was I wanted my kids to do their homework at a specific time. I wanted them to come home, have a snack, do their homework, and then they could play. And I was very insistent that that was the routine, but that wasn't what my kids needed. So really figuring out what they needed. In my case, my one child needed to have a physical outlet. They needed to go jump on a trampoline or run around or um, you know bang on some drums, or they needed some type of physical outlet before they could settle again to do homework. um, my son preferred to get it done right away. As soon as I got home from school, he wanted to get his homework done so he didn't have to think about it again. My daughter, on the other hand, never wanted to do her homework. So you really have to dig into, is it better for them to do it right away? Is it better for them to do it after dinner? I would suggest typically not right before bedtime because then a child is tired and not thinking. But really trying to figure out what time works is helpful. And then body doubling. So body doubling and finding the right tool. So body doubling is something a lot of adults with ADHD now have heard of, not everybody. And it's typically where you work on your own projects simultaneously with somebody else who's working on their projects simultaneously. And for people with ADHD, adults and kids, um, this is a super huge help in getting stuff done. I do it regularly. I grab a friend, we go for coffee, I work on my stuff, she works on her stuff, and we leave happy. Um, you can do it with your kids too. So I had a mother recently complaining about she hated to do her shopping list. She hated to do her meal planning and her shopping list, but she wanted to do it. She also had trouble with her child getting their homework done. So I suggested that they do it together at the same time. Body doubling, it made it feel like a family event. And lo and behold, the tantrums went down. So you could try that. Um, and then again, there's so many different kinds of tools out there that are available, from things to, you may need, your child might need things read to them as opposed to reading, or calculators that work, all the different things, making sure you have all the right tools that are going to set your child up for the best success possible. That's what you want to aim for. Donna, go ahead.
I had a question about the body. It's called body doubling. I
Body
mean, I guess,
doubling or co-working.
oh, co-working. So what age would you say that's appropriate for? Would you start that?
So if you think about it, most kids are doing that in school all the time, right? Like their friends are all doing it. So it really can be done anytime as long as it's not actually distracting to your child. So your first or second grader is going to come home with a worksheet of paper, and if you have them sit and do theirs while you sit and do your outline
Billing
for
or
the week or
whatever.
your bills for the week, right? It then becomes more like a family event and not like you need to do your homework and you need to get this done and blah 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 blah. So it feels more natural.
So when you say right tools, I'm thinking already like structure. What would you say? Okay, so now let's say it's carved out like 3 to 4. This is while you're working on that. I'm sitting next to you, or and doing it as well, or the close proximity, or could it be like I'm cooking while you're doing it?
A lot of times it doesn't, as a lot of times as long as you're either in the same room, it doesn't matter what you're doing. And for adults, I don't necessarily think this works as well for kids, but for adults, even being online together or on the phone
I love
together.
study groups big time. I mean, there's so much support and research for why studying is with buddies and things like that. I
Right.
can see that kind of theory comes, research comes here too, you know?
Yep.
And you, that's, yeah,
When I first heard about it as an adult, I looked back
makes
and
sense.
thought, Oh, I used to do that all the time as a kid when I had chores. I would call my friends up
Oh,
and not knowing that that's what it was, but I'd do my chores while I was talking on the phone because otherwise I was bored. So for my particular brain, boredom is a big problem. And so if I struggle to get in the shower and I look at why, it's because I'm bored. If
oh
I
wow.
struggle to,
Mhm.
so trying for me, that's not everybody, but
Yeah.
for me, trying to get to the boredom, why, fixing the boredom is a big step for
Oh,
me.
I definitely see it. Like I said, it makes sense for me from even like again, like you said, you don't like to work out, you have a buddy workout, the
Right.
two, it makes it easier and it's more manageable. Um, Boredom, definitely, I'm more like, I know you multitask, multitasking for me is harder, so
Mhm.
definitely, but I understand why with ADHD that could be, you know,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Um,
Thank you for sharing.
sure. My last tip about homework is get rid of it. If you're here in the States, if your child has an IEP plan or you intend to pursue that, um, you can request no homework or limited homework as an accommodation. You can insist upon it. Um, the school will fight you. They will say, no, the kid has to do homework. It's just not true. You can, and many people do, either eliminate it or reduce it. So how do you reduce it? So if the child gets a worksheet that they're supposed to fill out the front and the back, and it's got 30 multiplication problems, your child might only have to do the first 10, or something like that. Because homework is supposed to be to make sure that your child has mastered a skill. So as long as your child is learning and mastering a skill, they don't need to do homework. You don't need to argue with them for 3 hours every night if it's just not going to work. Um, and and so definitely request it. I'm not sure if it's something that can be requested in a 504 plan, which is different than an IEP. But I know that it can be it's an accommodation in many people's IEP plans. So if homework becomes a struggle and nothing works, really look into reducing or eliminating it, especially in the elementary, middle school range, because most of that they don't need. They really don't. Donna, as an educator, are you does that make you feel some way?
Not, so I'm gonna say I agree with you. As an educator, I think you're right on point. And I'd like to chime in again as a person who used to sit on the IEPs to help with goals like this, because I agree with you as an educator and a neurodivergent myself, dyslexia, I could tell you if it's used as an assessment, then yes, it could go on the 504 because the 504 is your
Mm,
assessment, adaptations and modifications and how but if homework is used as a practice, then again, having it worded where can they do, again, it's going to be very hard as practice to convince teachers that again, it's extra practice, right? So the question is the goals. If the teacher says, well, with extra practice, we can meet the goal at the end of the year. Again, the thing is, well, maybe we need to revisit the goal. Maybe we need to make that this
right.
mastery happens, later on. You can stretch the time, right? So teachers
Mm-hmm.
will try to, again, say, well, we don't have extra time to give them for practice, and that will be the pushback, right?
Right.
So the question is, well, do we have a reasonable time frame for the goal then that we're setting? Maybe we can visit that, because if they need extra time at home to complete this goal, and at home it's not something you're going to address as a parent, again, then that means the goal has to be, and it's not saying one or the other. I think every family has to make their own decision,
Right.
but there is going to be some accountability on the teacher's part to meet these goals. So I don't want
Mm-hmm.
to say it's fair to just say, well, make it happen. It's a team effort.
True. Yes, absolutely. Melissa, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to add in that our district had previously said there was no homework required for K through 5, but they found that when they got to middle school and high school that the kids were really struggling with organization and time management to get all of their work done. So they've started to slowly add it back in. So I think part of it is just like having those conversations and balancing what is needed to help them build that skill so they can be successful when they're more independent versus what's a struggle and unnecessary if they are meeting their goals.
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. Like if you have no homework all the way until high school, and then you walk into high school and they expect you to do, every class has papers and thesis and, kids aren't going to be prepared for that. So there's absolutely a balancing act that you have to do there. Um, but my big thing is that for our kids, what's the most important at home is the connection between the parent and the child. And if that is going to be superseded by constant fights about homework, then that's got to change, and there's got to be a different way, whether it's addressing more time at school to master a skill or finding a different way to master a skill. um, it's just not conducive to having massive meltdowns every day, which some
And
families do have.
Kat,
Go ahead, Donna.
when you say alternative, I think that's your key because again, I always try to push for it's a family and school partnership. We have to see
Yeah,
it that way because it's the reality. They're in school 8 hours, 7 hours, so we got to be humble to say they're raising our children.
absolutely.
However, they don't get to, like you said, there is, when you're dealing with IEP, an alternative assessment option. And if it's always a very heavy written, and that's what seems to be the problem, or heavy math, and that seems to be, so again, are there alternative means? Can I videotape my child doing this, this, and that? Can it be an audio, some of these
Right.
assessments? Or again, these practices. So if it's a writing practice, I can see why you would insist on writing. But if it's an assignment of read something and answer questions, can that be done via audio? Because maybe my child would be less
Abs-
reluctant to give you the answer, you know?
Absolutely. Other things you can ask for are
Yeah.
things like a child not be penalized for handwriting, a child be allowed to use a typewriter or a
Typing.
computer before
Yeah.
it when they're other students that may not yet be using them. A lot of neurodivergent people have awful handwriting, myself included,
I know.
and no amount of practicing really made it better. So um, so there's always alternatives. Whatever your child is struggling with, there's a way to help them, but you and the school have to work together to figure out what it is. Okay, any other thoughts or questions before we move to the last little piece? All right, getting out the door on time without tears or tantrums. So morning time is hectic for many, many, many households. Whether you are a stay-at-home mom, a working mom, a family who has multiple shifts, multiple people, everybody's going in different directions in the morning is how it typically seems. So you've got kids to get out the door, parents to get out the door, sometimes kids to go to different schools, different school buses, different, and no matter what happens, all of a sudden there's a meltdown, right? Like you don't have time, and that's the time your child is on the floor refusing to put their shoes on, right? So how do we manage? So preemptive stuff is the best way to go with this. So the one thing that has worked with many of my clients has been every night doing a 10-minute family reset. And so everybody who lives in the house at whatever time it is does a 10-minute reset where they find the things that they need for the day and get them where they're supposed to go. Put your shoes where you're supposed to go, your jacket where it's supposed to go, your homework's in your backpack, etc. Combined with that is having a launch pad. It's something I recommend for kids, but I find a lot of adults like to use this too. A launch pad is usually near your front door. It's where you should put your keys, your purse, your backpack, your sunglasses, your wallet, everything that you need to walk out the door in the morning. If during your family reset at night, you put it all away and it's there ready to go in the morning, then it's going to be easy peasy. No looking for shoes, no looking for your jacket. This one's keys, that one's glasses. It's all right there. Um, you can do the same thing I recommended earlier with the visual timers and transitions, for getting out the door on time. For I was talking about the bracelet that was actually used for getting out the door on time. I talked about it back in bedtime routine, but that mother actually used it for this. She wanted her kids to be more involved in, and didn't want to have to be do this, do this, do this, do this, do this every 5 seconds. So I have some parents with younger kids who have, little charts on the walls. Um, I find, again, with the transition time, warning a kid ahead of time that a time is coming up is often helpful. It's almost time for this. It's almost time for that. Let's start getting ready for this, as opposed to put your shoes on, right? Again, it gives them a minute to get their brain out of whatever they're currently doing and focused on what needs to be done. Um, and the last piece of this before I ask for questions is, if your child or you are regularly having meltdowns, issues, tears, frustration in the morning to get out the door, track what's happening. Um, are you hungry? Are they not eating enough? Are they not sleeping enough? Is it that there's some kind of sensory thing? So I had a mother who, when she started tracking why the meltdowns were happening, she was able to determine that there were certain socks that her kid was hated. And so every day while they were waiting for the bus, the kid wanted to take his shoes off. And she couldn't figure out why until it would lead to this big meltdown. And eventually she realized it was the sensation of the specific socks. So, um, or is it does it feel too rushed? Do they need to get up a little bit earlier? Is there an unmet need somewhere? Do they need 5 minutes of snuggle time in the morning? Do they need to be left alone in the morning? My daughter was a don't talk to me in the morning because it doesn't go well. So you can kind of learn what things trigger meltdowns, um, and try to avoid those. Other ideas for getting out the door on time. I know people are very creative and imaginative with their ideas, finding things that work. Okay, so let's talk a few other little tidbits here. So trying to get a child to follow routine is going to be most effective with praise and reward, not punishment. And finding a way to bring them into the routine, make it their routine, make an end goal that they're interested, because they're not interested in washing their hands and brushing their teeth, right? Like we have to find a way to match their need with your need. Um, Celebrate progress and improvement. And this is something I have to work on even for my own personal self. I tend to set a goal and then I don't celebrate the progress in between where I am and where my end goal is. And so for yourself and for your kids, if they're getting better, if they're making progress, if they're improving, make sure to stop and notice that, celebrate that. Oh, you did a great job today. I noticed you got ready for school very quickly this morning. How did you feel about it? Things of that nature is going to make them feel more inspired to continue to do it. Co-regulating and collaborating. So these are two of my main keystones in working with parents. So nobody is born knowing how to regulate their emotions. So our kids need us to teach them how to regulate their emotions. And one of the best and most effective ways to do that is to co-regulate with them. I do a whole separate class on co-regulation that I'd be happy to mail anybody who's interested about. But basically, sitting with a child, if a child's having a tantrum, and instead of trying to get them out of the tantrum, sit with them, just breathe, be with them for a minute, See if your breathing helps calm them, right? And then you can work into noticing your feelings, starting, you can work this throughout all of routines and daily life, is learning how your body feels and how that's coming out. So when you feel angry, how are you feeling? When you feel sad, what does it feel like? And then teaching the child ways to regulate that by doing it with them is going to be the best example. So I like to say things like, you can do this everyday life. Like you come in from your day and you're in the kitchen with your kid. If you just like stretch and say, oh, my shoulders feel tense. I think I need a wiggle break, right? Right there, they might get into that wiggle break too. And that's teaching them, when my body feels like this, maybe I should do this, right? It helps them to connect what to do with what they're feeling. And then collaboration, go ahead, Donna.
I was gonna say, just as you were doing the wiggles, my body, I mean, there's this mirroring effect that neurologically goes in, that when they see you doing it, even if
Mm-hmm.
they don't, like, you'll see them making a fuss, but still doing it, like sometimes it goes beyond their control. Like when you're breathing, there's a neurological mirroring effect
Yes.
that we now know from research happens, that sometimes we're not even conscious of it. So I think
Right.
that's great advice.
Yep. So yeah, and it's just, and you can, once you're used to doing it, you can do it with your kids. If you see your child is getting a little anxious, you can either ask them or you can talk about how you feel. Like, oh, I feel like I'm a little buzzing inside. I feel a little nervous. What do you think I should do about that? Right? Like, get them involved. And that's the collaborative piece. So kids really need to take ownership of their feelings and their decisions as much as they possibly can. And so by consistently being curious and collaborative with your kids, you're really going to find the best path forward to whatever the struggle is. And the biggest thing I always like to leave people with is, the most important thing in any situation is your connection with your child. It doesn't matter if the kid gets to school on time. It doesn't matter if you're late for work. It doesn't matter. The most important thing is that your kid knows that you're there for them and that you've got their back and you're going to figure it out together. Questions, thoughts, comments? Go ahead, Michelle.
Hi, so I have a couple questions.
Sure.
I have a 7-year-old and she struggles tremendously with the getting out the door on time stuff. And where we have a lot of trouble is she'll just like plop down in the middle of a room and just stop doing anything. Or she'll wander away from a task 100 times. Like it
Mm.
can take an hour to brush her teeth because she keeps wandering away from the sink.
Could you brush your teeth at the same time?
She also struggles with waking up, so it
Mm.
usually takes her a lot longer to wake up. Um, so yeah, I don't know.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different. Is she an only child?
I have a son who is a year younger, and he's usually ready and waiting by the door with his boot and coat
I,
on.
I'm never ready.
I know. Yeah, me neither. Me neither.
um, have you it without knowing more, it's hard to offer advice. Have you really asked why, what is she feeling when she sits there? What is she thinking? Like, is there maybe she'll tell you like any kind of.
She's tired. She doesn't want to go to school. She wants a home day.
I don't blame her.
Yeah, me neither. I don't either.
um yeah, I can't think of something off the top of my head without spending a lot of time asking a bunch of questions. But I will give it some thought, and I have everybody's email from signing up. So if I come up with some tips, I will send them your way for sure.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else? Okay, here's where I do my little tiny pitch. If you want to discuss with me more about how I can help you become that calm, collaborative caregiver that your kids really need, feel free to book a discovery call with me. You can do that on my website or in some of the emails that I'll send out. Or text me, message me. I'd be happy to chat. Um, you're all on my mailing list now. Please use the preferences on the mailing list if there's emails you don't want to receive. You can set the preferences and let you know. And then anybody today who does book a discovery call by the end of January, I'm going to give you 4 sessions for $200, which is a little more than 25% off of my normal rates. And so that's just for book. The discovery call is free, so you can book that anytime between now and the end of January. And then should you decide that you'd like to work with me, I will give you that special to get started. That's it. That's all I have. Anybody have any questions or thoughts? Something else you'd like to contribute? Michelle, is your hand still up or up again?
Oh, I'm good.
Okay, no, that's fine.
Thank you. This was really nicely organized and put together, and it's a good resource.
Awesome. I'm hoping that when I record it or when I play it back, it'll be enough that I can show other people too. So thank you for asking questions and thank you for being here. And you will all get email from me and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you for spending some time with me this afternoon.
Thank you. Have a good
Awesome.
one.
Thanks.